Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ignite Your Heart Masterclass. I am so excited to have Naomi Gale with me today. Naomi, welcome.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. A treat to be here.
Now, I would love for you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do, and also, if you could include a backstory, how did you get here?
Okay, so what I do is essentially work through all things pelvic health related. So I focus on everything within the pelvis, but my real passion is to focus on the vagina and talk about the vagina and how it's something in society that we don't talk about enough. Also, we don't allow for ourselves to understand that space enough. So I work with people through a range of tools, including a fascia release massage in that space. And I also work as a doula and birth keeper. So I witness the importance of that space through birth as well. And then how did I get into it? I got into it because I went through IVF and IUI with for my children. So I went on a fertility journey, and I had really painful periods back when I was like 17, when I first had periods. And I always remember like the advice then just being really shocking, and that women's healthcare in general and women in general are not prioritized. And I always felt that as like, when I was younger. And so when I went into fertility treatment, I realized that the woman is still not prioritized. So in my situation, there was a sperm issue. So my husband had literally no sperm. So this was a really easy fix when you think about it. It's like, okay, well, there's no sperm, so you're not going to be able to get pregnant with no sperm. And then when we're on that journey, it was crazy because they would just put the whole spotlight back on me. It's like, yeah, he does have no sperm, but you're not going to be able to get pregnant. You're going to miscarry because your BMI is too low. Like all this bullshit. And I was like, why are we even going down this route? Like, just let me see a sperm and then we'll see what happens. And so I went to Greece for my fertility treatment. So I'm based in the UK and I went to Athens for my fertility treatment. And I noticed that there they treat the whole woman and they look at the woman holistically. And I've recommended so many women now go to the same clinic that I went to. I even had a friend the other day, she's just been out there, and she was like, oh my gosh, like they literally make you feel like you can have a baby. And I just noticed that in general, women are never prioritized as like empowered to be in that space of acknowledgement of their needs so that they can tune into what they need and be able to move forward with their journey, right? It's always just continuously disempowering women. So I kind of like when I got through fertility treatment and I look back, I realized that there needed to be some kind of journey for me to go on to understand my needs first and foremost, having gone through all of this and still had painful periods after all my births and things like that. So I was like, well, and the final straw was I just went into a doctor's, and I was like, look, I've given birth, I've still got painful periods, and I even have painful ovulation now. And I was like, twice a month, it's not a vibe. And he was just like, well, women like you, and I was like 29 at the time or 30 at the time. He was like, women like you just have your womb removed. And I was like, that's the answer? It's like to have my womb taken out? What is that about? And I just remember walking out from there and I just went on this really long journey. And then when I was doing all this training and really specific, interesting training, like vaginal steaming training or going down like room work specifically, then I started finding when I was having clients that there was something more. That every time I was with their bodies and with them, I was like, there's something more that needs to be tended to. And it was the vagina, and it was like the missing key for me within the space. And that's how I just got into this like real deep space of vagina chat,
Oh
basically.
my goodness. And that I'm really excited for today's conversation because I had mentioned to you, I've never really had this conversation with anybody before, right? This is not as publicly advertised as you see. And so today we're talking about understanding your needs through your vagina. And I'm very curious if you can just do a brief tie-in, like in your space, how do you see this um supporting women in their own life and also like enhancing their relationships?
I like to weave in. So when I work with women, I work on a physical, spiritual, and emotional level. And I work on that through this space. So I believe that the pelvis is the rooted space for women. So it's the roots to it all. And if we were to look at a plant and we were looking at the roots of the plant, we start with the roots of the plant. When anyone goes on a healing journey, they'll go to the head, they'll go to the heart, but they won't go to their root. And I'm like, if you're not rooting in, if you're not aware of your rooted needs through your pelvis, then you're not doing this whole healing journey that you're on. You're not really accessing what it is that you really truly need. And so the way I view it is that when we're aware that this is the space that we're all birthed from and that we're all connected to, and we're, as women, we're connected to our mums and our grandmothers and great grandmothers and further and further. And when we're aware that we're a cyclical being that's in tune with nature and we're part of that space, and when we're aware that we have like this real deep need to adorn ourselves to the earth and like have this like feminine empowerment through the pelvis, when we're aware of that, we start to tune in with what energies have been in that space, whether it's your energies from your own challenges or traumas and journey, or whether it's your mums, your grandmothers and great grandmothers that you're holding on to. And that definitely exists, particularly so in certain spaces for some women. So then what I look at is how the pelvis is physically holding on. So there are a lot of manifestations within the pelvis that we don't talk about enough. Things like, could be anything from PCOS, endometriosis, vaginismus, vulvodynia. I mean, the list is freaking endless when you think about how many challenges and manifestations come from that space. Those challenges and manifestations are almost like the body's screaming out at that point. It's screaming out for you to acknowledge yourself within whatever space that is. And so that for me is where the challenge then needs to be met with what the emotional holding of that space is. And when we access the fascia within that space, the fascia, we know more and more. If anyone starts going on their journey, they know the body's holding on to emotions, memories, feelings, traumas. They know this. And they talk about fascia more and more within the body. And we know that fascia is connected throughout the whole body. But what we're not doing in society is talking about the fascia within the vagina. But yet the fascia exists within the vagina. And so when I was working with clients, for example, if somebody had been through a rape situation and they were trying to find safety in their current relationship and vaginismus was coming up, and they would be saying, but why is it like this perfect person that I'm with, and yet I can't access sex, pleasure, joy with this person, for example. Oh, but I have been through rape multiple times, once, however it is on their journey. Why are we not marrying this all up to acknowledge that they've never had the space to be truly heard, but through the space where the issue took place? And that's where the body is holding on. So what I see and what I witness is that unless we're tending to a woman on this level, at this depth, then we're missing a huge puzzle piece on their healing journey, is the way.
Mm. Now, I'm very curious because, in my own journey, I've experienced like PCOS in my past. And then I did a lot of like emotional healing around my traumas and stuff. And I did notice a correlation. So what you're saying is the symptoms in our body, it's telling us what needs to be healed, what needs to be heard, what needs to be seen. And a lot of that can be accessed through the vagina. And is this very specifically for like sexually related stuff, or can it be all kinds of stuff that is stored in the vagina and that particular area of feminine, the womb space?
Often what happens within that space is when we come into it is that people come into it because there may have been some kind of, sometimes people come to my space because there's pain during sex, or because they can't access like an orgasm, for example, or they want to enjoy sex more. That's sometimes the reason why people come. I don't really talk about sex that much in my space, which I feel like plenty of people talk about sex. It's not where I speak to, because what really comes up when we actually strip it all back and go into that space is actually this general feminine disempowerment that exists. And there's so much shame within the feminine, and women feel so much shame. And we've perpetuated shame in society. So of course women feel shame, right? And so shame comes up a lot, and self-worth comes up. Worthiness comes up massively within the vagina. And then a lot of just childhood memories can come up around how they were treated as a woman growing up, whether they were in an abusive in family environment or not. There can be so many small little pieces that we're not really aware are still interacting with us. Often I find that people will come to me and be like, I've done so much work. This is just like another part of the journey. And then they come in and they realize that there's still so much there within that space. And it takes a lot. So to come into that space, it can bring up a lot of things at the same time. So there may be like some kind of memory from a sexual encounter, but then it starts going into memories from childhood, and then it might go into just feelings overall. And then we end up with this big soup of emotion and challenge within that space that we have to navigate. So when someone comes to me, the session's a minimum 4 hours. And they're minimum 4 hours, and I hold a woman for 4 hours. And I don't think women understand what it feels like to be truly held by another woman, to be witnessed and heard for 4 hours minimum. And when you witness and hold a woman on that level, to that depth, in that intimate space with no sexual like links to it at all, that's how deep this goes, and that's how much can come up basically.
Wow. And what are some of the like after, I guess like the benefits of doing this work, right? Like you had mentioned of some people come to you because they don't experience like pleasure during sex or it's painful, but like are there other benefits once they've released? And does it require, is it just an emotional release, or is it do you have to physically touch the vagina? Like what else does it entail?
Yeah, so I'm within the walls of the vagina, and there's mainly this emotional release. And it feels like this real, just gentle movement of mainly energy through the body. Like it is touch, but it is mainly a lot of energy work, like pausing within the pelvis, within the space. And then when someone goes away and integrates, they often keep in touch with me. So I don't really allow for someone just to leave and then not keep in touch with me. So they have like a 2 week kind of keeping in touch period. Sometimes it's 5 days, sometimes 2 weeks. And so within that, they integrate the experience, and so much can come up afterwards. So I always say to people that the actual space of the vagina, when we're in there, that's like a little blip of the whole piece that we're putting together here. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring a woman back together and create this like whole. And so when we then integrate it, that's when the little pieces are slowly put back, and there'll be like the what might have come up will be like seeds, and they're planting those seeds, and we're going away and we're tending to those seeds, and we're just like integrating those memories, those feelings, those emotions, and we're gently like leaning on, oh, and then I thought about this that's come up, and that story, and that's probably maybe why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling around this. And what often happens is that when a woman takes back and claims back that space as theirs, claims back the pelvis as theirs, and that rooted space, and tends to that, like if you were tending to any plant's rooted space, they tend to then flourish and bloom. And so often what happens is a woman will come to me, and maybe 6 months later will be like, this has happened, and I just have to tell you because I know it's linked to the work that we did. And so that's the beauty of that space. It's the kind of space that, although is huge at the time, for me, what I see is that healing should be something that is a gentle daily reminder of what it means to come into the body. And doing this vaginal work is that, because they go away and they first of all might tend to the pelvis themselves on a regular basis, which is what I encourage them to do. And they will root down like visually in that space, and they'll be aware of that space. And it's not about like, in society, it's like, do your Kegels, do your pelvic floor, that'll solve it all. It solves fuck all. What a waste of time. So, it's being able to like come and tend to ourselves, like the tending of that space. And that's what then allows for this evolution. Most clients that come to me and tend to that space in this way, especially when they've been in a ceremony with me like that, will say the only time they've ever been in something similar is if they've gone away and done an ayahuasca ceremony. That's the level of depth that like it brings up, but without having to go on an ayahuasca journey. But yeah, that's what yeah, happens there.
Yeah. So it is a very holistic approach because I'm hearing there is like the emotional sense, the physical, you do physical exercises too, right? So there's that physical, the spiritual connection. And I'm curious what like when you say holding space, I want like I would love like an example, like maybe a real life example, if it's not too much to share, like a real life example of maybe the process of that goes through, like what they're experiencing in terms of symptoms, and then what the process is, and then like what happens after.
Okay, so let's think. Somebody comes to me with vaginismus is a really good example. So if you no one knows what vaginismus is, a vaginismus is where the muscles and the walls of the vagina will close when there's any penetration, and that could be fingers or tampons or a penis. And it basically is it's a brace. It's a bracing for the worst. The body is bracing. And we brace in general, like we're always like flip, it's like, oh, if something's coming towards you, you would brace, right? If it's something that you didn't want. And so that's essentially what the vagina does. And it's very, very challenging because, first of all, it's a psychosomatic condition. So when you go to a doctor, they will get a speculum and they will open up the vagina and they will tell you there's nothing there, which means they gaslight you and tell you that it's all in your head and that you think you're going mad, right? And so someone will go on a vaginismus journey for months and years sometimes before they even realize that there's more to it than that. And what the doctors will often say, and even if they land in the space with someone that understands vaginismus, they'll say it'll just go away in its own time, which it tends to do, right? But imagine being on a journey where you're literally in absolute agony. Like it feels like someone is stabbing you in your vulva and then within the walls of the vagina. I mean, I've had vaginismus in the space where you can't even touch the labia. It's that painful. So you can't wear jeans. You can't sit on the floor. You can't have sex. You can't wear your tampon or your cups, or it's everything. And sometimes that also leads to thrush or recurrent UTIs. Like it's a constant, like there's more to it than that, right? And then you're being told it's all in your head. So where do you go? What do you do? Like, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to just live with this pain for like
Yeah.
years until one day it just disappears and you go, oh, that was a weird blip in my life where my vagina felt like someone was stabbing it. Like it's just a bizarre situation to be in. And so what we have is a situation where society is not acknowledging the psychosomatic conditions that exist within the pelvis. Everything within that pelvis has to have an emotional holding. And we're doing a disservice to women everywhere by not acknowledging that there's an emotional holding within that space. And so then what happens is someone might come to me because I genuinely when people come to me, they're like, this is weird. So you're not a gynecologist. And I'm like, no. And you're not like, doing like pelvic health work, like, like in a, like a setting that's normal for this. It's all very weird. And I'm like offering things that might seem quite wild in a society that doesn't prioritize women's health in this way. But what I'm doing is only what every woman would have been like women would have been tended to back in the day, and we're not tending to women. So they come to me to be in that space, right back where it used to be before medicine got involved and became a misogynistic patriarchal system that it is. So then what happens is that they'll come to me and we have to start understanding and unpicking the stories that may be there. So we have to understand the journey that they've been on. We have to understand whether there's been previous relationships, whether there's been miscarriages, whether there's been abortions, whether there's been pregnancies, whether there's been babies, whether there's been how many babies, whether there's been partners, whether there's been abuse, all of this stuff has to come out. We can't leave no stone unturned. And often a lot of the space as well is sometimes about the relationship with the mother. The mother comes up hugely. We work with the mother line within this space. We work with the mother wound within this space. And the sister wounds often come up in this space. So it's all linked in to the pelvis. It has to be. It's the work of the feminine. So once we've kind of got into a point of like acknowledgement of what's coming up, we can start to see and unpick where the vaginismus may be rooting from, for example. So this could be like if you're going through infertility, this could be if you're going through PCOS, or, you know, it's all sorts. And you have to unpick and see what the stories are and what's coming up the most at the moment in that space. And so someone might come, so generally people come to me and they have an initial call and a chat, and then they'll have a session that's like 90 minutes to sort of like be aware of what's coming up. And then when they come to me in person, we start with like a ceremonial, like deep feminine space of just pulling an oracle card and touching in with like this awareness that we're in a spiritual space as well as this physical space. And we don't start in a way like we would normally start going to like a doctor's appointment, you know, it's totally the opposite of that. And it allows the body to unravel. It allows us to work with the nervous system. It's very like nervous system led. So there might be some breath, there might be some visualization, there might be some orientation, you know, and then we might vaginally steam. So vaginal steaming is something that I work with a lot because it allows for the softening of the walls within the muscles, and it allows for the body to also just surrender in a little bit more, and it allows us to be aware. And I often can see where the body is holding just through the vaginal steam, and how the body is like reacting with that. And then we would then have a break, and then we move into a touching of the body, not the vagina. So I like to check in through, so I'm a massage therapist through the womb. So I check in first of all with the coccyx. And what's really fascinating is that a lot of people have had a fall with their coccyx, and no one thinks about that fall with the coccyx. They're like, oh yeah, I had that really bad fall when I was, you know, XYZ, sometimes older, skiing, horse riders, snowboarders. That impact from the coccyx can hold an impact within the rest of the pelvis because it's all interlinked and the fascia is all interlinked, right? And that's just, you know, that's just a physical holding of whatever the experience might have been. So I can feel underneath the coccyx. So I go underneath the coccyx, and I always say to people, because it's quite low, it's like I'm not going in the anus, I'm just going under the coccyx. So I have to like make that clear. And then I feel and I can feel the holding pattern on the left and the right side. So I differentiate between the feminine side and the masculine side because it's very different within the vagina, and I can feel the holding pattern through that space. So if I think there's going to be some level of holding that's going to be quite tight, or there's going to be numbness, I can feel that already within the body under that touch. And then we swap over, and then I work with like how the diaphragm is, how the gut is. I work with the ileocecal valve, which is the flap between the small intestine and the large intestine, and that's really fascinating to me with every person, the ileocecal valve. I work with the colon, and then I work with the womb, and I work with the ovaries, all through touch. And it's at that point where we can really see and check in. And there'll be things that will be coming up in that space for often most people. But then we come through this really deep space of acknowledgement that we've been on this journey together, and we're going to consent fully to whether we go into the vagina. Because oftentimes when someone example has vaginismus, if they're going to come into me, into my space, and say yes and bypass the fact that they want to say no, then it's completely pointless being in the space in the first place, because that's exactly partly what the problem with vaginismus often is it's the bypassing of full consent within spaces that they exist in. So then we check in like several times before we go into the vagina, and I pause at labia and I go into the vagina, and we're pausing in the vagina. I mean, I wear a pink glove obviously naturally, and then we're pausing within the vagina, and we're first of all allowing for the muscles to move around my finger, and I can really feel into where I want to be, whether I want to move to the left and right. And sometimes just pausing and going in the vagina for nothing more than this reclamation of space can bring up so much for a woman. I've held people in that space with like tears and just this whole body like shaking and moving. And this is where someone might say to, because you know, obviously I get a lot of backlash at times on social media predominantly, and they're always like, you know, almost calling bullshit on the whole situation. And I'm like, come and witness a woman be held in that space, and where I've done nothing but simply pause in the middle of her pelvis and acknowledge exactly where she is. Witness that, and you can understand what the body is holding on to in that space. And then what happens is, rather than the other part of this is where we're not really talking that much and there's something coming up, I'll be there, and it sounds wild and wacky, and people are like, this is how far people have to like stretch themselves, and only if you experience it, often you have to experience it to understand. But I will be there, and I will have this question, like something will come to me and I'll be like, this question has to come out and has to be answered, and I'm almost always bang on with the question that's coming up. And the question could be around anything. It's sometimes as wild as there's someone here, and I'm like, there's someone coming up in your space right now. And it's
Wow.
so, and I hate calling that out, because I'm always like, if I'm wrong, I'll look like a right dick. But I'm always like, there's someone here in this space, and sometimes there genuinely is. And there'll be someone sometimes that they've not told me about, that they were like, I haven't told you about this situation with this person. And it doesn't have to be sexual. And then that's where, and then we work with that. Sometimes it's an experience, sometimes it's just an emotion, and I can just be with the question that needs to be answered. They answer the question, they're moving it through the body. And I know that also can sound wild, but if you're talking it through and you're being with that thought process, and I say to them, it's not a first date, we don't have to keep talking, you can process for as long as you need to process that question. And then the question comes through, and then they go on this journey with answering the question, and then you're like, oh, and then they're like, oh, and it's like that piecing again. And so we work the one side, we work the other side. Sometimes there's like gritty bits, painful bits, numb bits, as well as like the question. So it's like the physical sensation with the questions. And vaginismus is a really interesting one, because what happens is when they go start talking about a certain person or a certain experience, it will tighten. So
Oh.
when you've gone into that space and you're with the muscles, and you're able to access, sometimes not straight away, sometimes someone have to come back to me like, once before, and then the second time you can really access the center. But there's always a difference between the first experience and the second experience, which is why I know this works for vaginismus. And so and people say that vaginismus just has to go away. No. So when you're there and you're pausing in that space, then the muscles often soften and you can have access, because vaginismus is trying to stop you from having access, right? So if you're able and you're there and you're pausing in that space, and the muscles are softening and the body is surrendering and they're surrendering into that space, it's fine. Soon as they go talking about something, experience, a challenge, a person, the muscles often tighten. And they don't just tighten like together, like it's not clear cut like that. It might be one side, then the other side. It's really, really fascinating. And so I always speak to that kind of manifestation as a real teacher, a real guide for that woman around what her needs are. And as awful and as horrible as it is, it's also a guide to remind them of their needs. And so we often just literally are just accessing that space for as long as it feels until we want to close. Sometimes it's 10, 20 minutes, sometimes it's 40 minutes, sometimes I'm there for an hour. It depends like what needs to happen and come up in that space. And we energetically close it, and then we go away and we integrate it, and we integrate the questions that have come up and the thoughts that have come up, and we talk them through more, and we might come with more tools for the body, more nervous system led tools. Yeah, so that tends to be the journey that someone will go on, if that helps.
That really does, because it paints a picture and a perspective of like, okay, this is what's happening and this is what we need to look at. And this is some of the things that you're doing to help hold the space to be seen, to be released. And oftentimes, even in healing that I do energetically, it really is creating that sense of safety inside of you. And once you create the safety inside of you, the protective mechanism that you used to have, it naturally dissolves, but you have to give that space to be seen and to be heard and to be processed and to be experienced and to let go. So thank you so much for sharing that too. That was very insightful.
Okay. Great.
Um, and I had asked in the beginning, before our interview, if you would be willing to share like a tool or a tip or a practice that maybe somebody going through an experience can connect to their vagina more. Um, and yeah.
Yeah, and I would love to say that it doesn't have to be a physical manifestation for someone to access this space. I believe that in about, I don't know how many years, 10 years, maybe. Everyone will just be having vagina massages and understanding their vaginas. I always say that it's like this real exploration of space. It's like your new landscape. It's like, how can you explore this landscape for yourself? So I always recommend that somebody sits and finds themselves in like a ceremonial space, light a candle, have a bath first, have a lovely shower, whatever it looks like. And just really be in ceremony of the body and being like, I'm going to explore my vagina for the first time in this way, and it's going to be a gift from me to me, basically, is the vibe. And some people like to pull an oracle card before or after and see what's coming up for them. And so I really am a big advocate. So anytime I can and talk about how we can access the space and massage it, I'm like, it's my favorite thing. So basically what you want is, and to begin with, you might not access the vagina, right? To begin with, you might end up in a situation where it only feels like you can be at labia, and that's plenty. Might only be with like the intention of exploring that space. Do you know what I mean? Like just, and so often I used to do a lot of workshops where people would come in and we would all, obviously cameras off at the time of like doing it. We're not all front, and people would say at the end, it's really interesting that I didn't feel like I wanted to go in my vagina. And just the saying of the no is as amazing as saying of the yes, right? And that's what I always advocate for. So you would be at labia first and foremost. And what you want to do is you want to bring in this like loving touch from the mons pubis down along the labia and like bring that in, because it's like a physiological approach to bringing in lubrication to that space. So you're bringing in that touch, moving down there until you feel like there's been an adjustment in that space and you feel ready to pause at entrance. And that's when you're checking in with yourself again. It's like, does it feel like a yes to go any further? Yes, no, and then you end up deciding. And so then if it's a yes, you'll go into the vaginal space. And when you're in the vaginal space, you're going to be exploring in this, essentially it's not a large area, right? But you're going to be exploring and splitting this into your clock. So you're going to be splitting this into 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and you're going to be exploring your right hand side is your right hand side of your body, and your left hand side for your feminine side of your body. So feminine and masculine. And you want to explore one half first because it will feel very different to the other half. It's really important to split them because you will notice the difference. And so what you want to do is you want to work with a fascia release. And the best way to describe it is if you have cling film and you had cling film on top of on water, and you were trying to move the cling film and spread it out. So it was scrunched up on top of water and you were trying to move the cling film so it was flat on top of water. What would that touch look like so that it didn't sink? That's the level of touch. That's the level of fascia release touch. So it's here with like you've got your bone and you've got your muscles. And then when you've like pressed in, you've got that space before the skin, and it's there where you're working with. That's how deep you're doing it. And when you're there, you might find within the space that there's like this like gritty sensation, numbness, or there's pain or discomfort. And so what you want to do is when that space exists, that's the perfect place to pause. Now, fascia release can be up to 11 minutes, but no one's going to pause with their finger in their vagina for 11 minutes per space. So you want to like pause for as long as you feel you want to pause for. And then you're going to hold that space. You're just going to hold it and then be with it. Direct your breath down with it. Be with anything that's coming up. Sometimes even when you do it for yourself, emotions can come up and feelings and memories can come up, even just for yourself. So then you pause, and then when you feel ready, you move on. And what you're doing is you're just simply adjusting the space on a physical and energetic level. And then you keep exploring the one side, and then you pause in the middle, and then you explore the other side. The best way to remind yourself of what this space looks like is that it mirrors the mouth. So more and more people are going for massages and facials and having like in-mouth massage. It's becoming a bigger thing, and everyone's like aware that this is more of a thing. And I was taking photographs for a friend of mine who does this work, and she's always been like, I just think if I came to you for vagina massage, you'd open up my world too much, and I'd want to just like leave the country and just like start again. So I can't come for a vagina massage. And I was like, okay. But then I was witnessing her like do this mouth massage, and she was talking about like the gritty parts and like, and I was like, that is exactly the same as what it's like in the vagina, but it's just because it's the vagina that it becomes a taboo. But it's all right to massage in the cheek, right? And so she was working around. And so this is, I always say, so to witness her do that, and me have already said that this is what it's exactly like, was just like such a gift. And this these lips are like the lips of the labia, right? So here, so when you're massaging, people are like, how far do I go? Well, to begin with, you might just be around the labia, right? And then sometimes you might go further back towards the cheek. You're never going to be like gagging, you know, you're not necessarily needing to go that far back, you know, you're not going to be like finding the cervix and having a good rummage necessarily, although some people have been like, I felt my cervix. I was like, what a gift. Yeah, just continuing just to really be with like the space basically around there, and then around there, and then you pause. And then what I like to say is, if you want to, you can have a like what would be an energetic clear and cleanse of that space, and you take in a really lovely deep inhale, and then as you exhale, you just give a nice circle around that space, and then you're coming out, and you are adjusting. If people want to have a physical check-in with themselves, they could do a little Kegel before they begin, little pelvic floor, check in with the holding pattern of the muscles and see what's coming up. And then at the end, they could do another Kegel. And what they often find is that their pelvic floor feels softer at the end, but it's not softer. It's actually just working together better. So when you first do your pelvic floor, often it's like one side comes in and the other side might be like, I'm trying, and like trying to like, you know, work together. And then at the end, it's all like trying to work together more. And so it feels like what you want for your pelvic floor is this beautiful sucking on a straw where it all works together, right? But most of us don't have that. All of us don't really have that, especially when we're like not breathing properly down into that space, you know, when we're all, you know, living laptop. So it can't work in the way we need it to work. So everyone should be giving themselves that. And if anyone's like, I need to do my Kegels, no, sack that off and come and do a lovely fascia release massage. That's the key for working with your vagina for sure.
This is absolutely informative and fascinating. Thank you so much, Naomi, for demonstrating. And before we end today, I know you have a free gift for the audience. If you can share that. And then also, I just have a final question for you at the end.
Yeah, so the gift is a how to massage your vagina. So I'll have a link and then people can sign up, and it gives you a little write-up, and it gives you a little video of what that looks like, again with some more support.
Fantastic. The link is below the video, so you guys can access the free gift. And if anyone's interested in working with you, what are some of your offers and how do they connect with you? What's your website?
So I have a book which is available on Amazon, and all good bookshops can order it. It's called In Your Vagina Lies the Key to Your Happiness. I always say that's a really great starting point. It goes through this 5-step approach that I have for coming back into relationship with the pelvis. So I have a book which was published last year, yay me. And then you can work with me on a one-to-one online if you're not in the UK. And I tend to offer people coming to me for like 6 sessions online, and we go through a few processes based on what's needed, or people come and work with me in person if you're UK based or ever in the UK. So yeah.
Fantastic. And what is your website?
It's thisisnaomigale.co.uk.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Naomi, for being here, for teaching on this masterclass. We are so informed now and so excited. I'm very excited for this, actually. With
Thanks,
that
Nick.
said, thank you everyone for tuning in, and I will see you guys in the next masterclass.